What happened when ancient humans ran out of food? The world ancient humans knew had no supermarkets, no stockpiles, no distribution systems. There was only what nature provided, and sometimes, nature provided nothing. Food crises were not exceptions in prehistory. They were part of the rhythm of life itself. And every time food ran out, human beings were forced to make decisions that shaped our biology, our culture, and ultimately, our civilization. What exactly happened when a prehistoric community ran out of food? What do bones, teeth, and artifacts buried in the layers of time reveal about these moments of desperation and of extraordinary resilience? The answers are written in stone, in sediment, and in our own DNA. And they are far more dramatic than most people realize. The body under extreme hunger. The human body keeps records. Every period of severe famine leaves permanent marks on teeth and bones, lines of hypoplasia, regions of interrupted growth that archaeologists can identify millennia later. Studies of skeletons from the Paleolithic and early Neolithic periods show clear patterns: reductions in average height during specific periods, compromised bone density, and signs of severe malnutrition in young individuals. Children were the most affected. Bone records reveal that in certain communities, the majority of children experienced at least one severe episode of food deprivation before the age of 10. The human organism, however, is extraordinarily adapted to scarcity. In response to prolonged hunger, metabolism slows dramatically. The body begins converting muscle into energy. The brain, a voracious consumer of glucose, reduces non-essential cognitive activity and prioritizes survival functions. This produced a specific physical and mental state. A starving human is not simply weak. In certain respects, they become more aggressive, more calculating, more focused on immediate resources. Hunger rewired social behavior at a fundamental level, transforming cooperation into competition and trust into suspicion, sometimes within the same family group. The first collective responses. When food became scarce, human groups did not collapse immediately. There were structured collective responses, some of them surprisingly sophisticated. The first strategy was implicit rationing. In hunter-gatherer communities, ethnographic evidence from isolated groups that lived under conditions similar to prehistoric ones shows that the elderly and children received priority during moderate scarcity. Adults of productive age, those capable of hunting and gathering, were kept functional at the cost of others' well-being. The second strategy was territorial expansion. Groups moved into areas they would normally avoid, the territories of other groups, regions with dangerous predators, unfamiliar environments. The archaeological record shows that during periods of environmental stress, tools characteristic of distinct groups appear mixed together at sites that were previously exclusive to a single culture. Boundaries were violated out of necessity. This inevitably led to conflict. Mesolithic sites, the period between the Paleolithic and Neolithic, show a dramatic increase in traumatic injuries to skulls during periods of climatic regression. Famine did not only kill directly, it ignited wars. Some of the earliest evidence of organized intergroup violence in the human record aligns precisely with episodes of prolonged drought and ecological collapse. Cannibalism, the taboo that archaeology confirms. This is the part most people prefer not to discuss, but which the archaeological record makes impossible to ignore. Evidence of cannibalism in famine contexts appears across multiple sites around the world. In Spain, at Atapuerca, human bones from the Pleistocene show cut marks identical to those found on animal bones slaughtered for consumption, knife marks at joints, signs of marrow extraction. In France, at Neanderthal sites, the same pattern repeats itself with striking consistency. It is important to distinguish ritual cannibalism, practiced for symbolic or religious reasons, from survival cannibalism. The latter emerges in contexts of extreme scarcity and is documented not only in prehistory but in recent historical groups under disaster conditions. Survival cannibalism did not represent a breakdown of civilization. It represented its continuation. A group that chose this practice was, in evolutionary terms, preserving the carriers of culture, language, and knowledge that would allow for collective survival in the long run. The bones of the dead became a final contribution to the living. It was a brutal arithmetic, but it was arithmetic nonetheless, and it worked. Innovation forced by hunger. Some of the most important advances in human history bear the signature of a food crisis. The processing of tubers, starchy roots that are normally toxic or indigestible when raw, was perfected during periods of protein scarcity. Groups that previously depended almost entirely on hunting learned, out of necessity, to ferment, sun-dry, and cook plants they would never have considered in times of abundance. The expanded use of aquatic resources follows the same pattern. Archaeological sites show that intensive consumption of mollusks, crustaceans, and freshwater fish increases dramatically in layers corresponding to periods of climatic stress. Shell middens, enormous deposits of shells found around the world, are, in part, testimonies to periods when terrestrial protein was insufficient to sustain growing populations. The domestication of plants, one of the most transformative events in human history, also has its roots in crisis. Agriculture was not born from the sudden brilliance of some enlightened individual. It was born from millennia of forced attempts to control and expand food sources in the context of increasing demographic and climatic pressure. Scarcity was the engine, desperation was the fuel, and the result was a revolution that would permanently alter the trajectory of our species, not because early farmers lived better than hunter-gatherers, but because they survived when others did not. What genetics reveals? The modern human body carries the genetic marks of ancient famines. The PARG gene, associated with efficient fat storage, is more prevalent in populations whose ancestors experienced prolonged periods of scarcity. The so-called thrifty genotype hypothesis proposes that the evolutionary pressure of repeated cycles of famine and abundance selected individuals with a greater capacity to store energy when food was available. This explains, in part, why populations with a recent history of severe famine show elevated rates of type 2 diabetes and obesity when suddenly exposed to high-calorie diets. The body was programmed for a world of scarcity that no longer exists, a mismatch between ancient survival code and modern abundance. Salivary amylase is another example. Humans produce far more of this enzyme, responsible for digesting starch, than other primates. The multiplication of amylase genes appears to have occurred in parallel with the increased consumption of tubers and cereals during periods of food stress. Our very saliva is a record of hunger. Every time you chew a piece of bread, ancient famine is quietly doing its work inside your mouth. Collapses and societies that did not survive. Not all human groups survived food crises. The archaeological record is full of absences, cultures that simply disappear from sedimentary layers during periods corresponding to severe climatic events. The Younger Dryas, an abrupt cooling that occurred approximately 12,900 years ago, coincides with the disappearance of several Upper Paleolithic cultures in Europe and with dramatic population reductions in East Asia. No more traces of their camps, their tools, their burial rituals. They did not migrate. They vanished. Yet some populations survived where others perished, and the difference was often the social network. Groups with established reciprocity relationships with neighboring communities had access to resources during local crises. Isolated groups, or those in permanent conflict with their neighbors, died alone. Intergroup cooperation was not altruism. It was survival technology. The groups that built alliances across territorial lines, that traded food, shared knowledge of seasonal resources, and extended kinship bonds beyond blood, were the ones whose descendants eventually populated the earth. Generosity, in this light, was not a luxury. It was a calculated investment in the only insurance policy that mattered. The psychological legacy. Famine left marks not only on the body, but on the collective mind of the species. The abundance of food-sharing rituals in virtually every known human culture, from the simplest to the most complex, reflects the evolutionary depth of food anxiety. Feasts, harvest ceremonies, food offerings to deities, hospitality as a moral obligation, all are cultural responses to the collective trauma of generations that barely survived. Hoarding, the compulsive accumulation of food beyond immediate need, is a universally observed behavior that in prehistoric contexts had clear adaptive value. In modern contexts, the same tendency remains encoded in our default behavior. The person who stockpiles canned goods before a storm is not being irrational. They are running ancient software on modern hardware. The rituals we built around food, the prayers before meals, the feasts to mark survival, the sacred status of bread in dozens of independent cultures across the world, are not merely symbolic. They are memory. Compressed into gesture and repetition, they carry the weight of every winter that almost killed us. Famine was not just an event that happened to ancient humans. It was a force that manufactured us. So what happened when ancient humans ran out of food? Everything. The body collapsed and reorganized itself. Groups fragmented and reformed under new pressures. Territorial boundaries were redrawn in conflict. New foods were discovered, new techniques invented, new genes selected for survival. The history of humanity is not a line of constant progress. It is a series of near-fatal crises from which we emerged, each time slightly different from what we were before. Harder, more adaptable, more creative, and, in the most unexpected ways, more human. We are not descended from the strongest. We are descended from the most resourceful, from those who, when the food ran out and the cold came in and the darkness did not lift, found one more way to hold on until morning. The next time you sit down to a meal, remember, you are on the other side of a long sequence of survival miracles. Every single one of your ancestors made it through. Not one of them gave up.